Good evening, students. Welcome to Learns Affairs Evolution series. Today is the second lecture of this series, and in this particular lecture, we will talk about various theories of evolution. In yesterday's lecture, we have talked about the theories which explain the origin of life on Earth. In this lecture, we will discuss about the theories of evolution. So, we will discuss these theories in this lecture, which is Lamarckism, Darwinism, Neo-Darwinism, and the mutation theory. Okay, so let's start this lecture. Basically, what is evolution? Evolution means slow and continuous change in organisms over a long period of time, resulting in the development of new species from the pre-existing ones. Okay, this is evolution, the continuous change in any organism over a long period of time, resulting in the development of new species from already existing species. It involves mechanisms like mutation, genetic recombination, natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow, which together shape the adaptation and survival of organism in changing environment. Factors like mutation can be a reason for a sudden change in any species. Okay, this change will accumulate for a long time, and which will ultimately lead to the formation of new species, and this process is known as speciation. The formation of new species from the pre-existing species is known as speciation. Okay, we will discuss about it later. So firstly, what was the view of Plato on evolution? Plato was a Greek philosopher who strongly influenced early Western thought. Okay, he founded the theory of idealism, in which he states that every object in this physical world is just a shadow or imperfect copy of an eternal, perfect, and unchangeable ideal form. Theory of idealism states that every object in this world is an imperfect copy of an eternal, perfect, unchangeable ideal form. For example, all the horses in the world are imperfect copies of ideal horses that exist in a higher reality. That exist in a higher reality. He denied the concept of evolution and change. Okay, according to him, species are fixed, eternal, and unchanging because they reflect these perfect forms. This belief supported the idea of special creation. Okay, he was also a supporter of the theory of special creation. We discussed it yesterday. Okay, then Aristotle. Aristotle was the student of Plato, and had more naturalistic ideas. Like, he proposed that living organisms could be arranged in a hierarchical ladder of complexity from simplest to the most complex forms. This is called the ladder of nature, or scala natura. Okay, this term was given by Aristotle. Aristotle also did not believe in the evolutionary change, and he thought that species are fixed and eternal. No change in species occur, or no evolution is there, was his view on evolution. But they can be arranged in increasing levels of perfection from simplest level to the very complex level of organization. His ladder implied a progression toward higher form, which influenced later evolutionary thinkers. So that's it. Now, the Lamarck's theory of evolution. Basically, this was the first complete theory to suggest how the new species arise from the pre-existing one. This was the very first theory which explained uh, how the species evolved from the pre-existing ones. Okay, this theory was proposed by Jean Baptiste Day Lamarck in his book Philosophy Zoologique in 1809. Okay, according to him, environmental influence or use and disuse of organs can lead to uh, changes in organisms, and these changes he called them acquired characters. Okay, he said environment can affect any organism. Okay, and also the use and disuse of a particular organ can also lead to some changes in the structure of organism. Okay, this change he called it acquired character, and these characters can be inherited to the offspring. Then the main postulates of Lamarckism is internal vital force. Every organism has an inbuilt tendency to increase in size and complexity. Okay, this was the first postulate, that every organism has an inbuilt capacity or inbuilt tendency to increase in size and complexity. For example, simple organisms, simple organisms evolve into complex ones over time. Okay, this is an example which shows the first postulate. Okay, simple organisms evolve into complex ones over a long period of time because they have the tendency to increase in size and complexity. Then the effect of environment and new needs. Then he said changes in the environment brings new needs in organism. If a person is living in a particular environment, his needs are different. If he shifted, or the environment around the environment surrounding him changes, it will bring new needs in the organism, and these new needs, to fulfill these needs, the organism has to develop new habits and new structures. He has to he have to he has to change his habits and the way of living to fulfill these requirements. Okay, this was his second postulate. Like, for example, at aquatic birds like ducks developed webbed feet to adapt for swimming. So this was his second postulate, which states that the change in environment bring new needs, and to fulfill these needs, the organism has to develop new habits or new structures. Okay. Then use and disuse of organs. He said organ which are used frequently became stronger and better developed than which are not in use. The organs which are not used gradually weaken and then degenerate. Okay, for example, like blacksmith developed strong arms or muscles. Okay, so he used his arms and muscles in a frequent manner, so his arms are strong and well developed according to Lamarck. And like cave animals which live in darkness lost functional eyes due to disuse. This was his third postulate. And the fourth postulate is the inheritance of acquired characters. The character acquired during lifetime of an organism are passed on to the next generation. This is the theory of inheritance of acquired characters given by Lamarck. He said any change that an organism develop in his lifetime, or a new habit, or it can be a new structure, this is these all things are counted in acquired characters, and these characters can be passed on to the next generation. For example, giraffes. Okay, uh, the ancestors of giraffe had short necks, but they have to stretch it to reach the tall trees, and the neck became longer, and this longer neck character was uh, inherited to the next generations. This was his postulate of inheritance of acquired characters. Talking about the examples of Lamarckism, the first example, as we have already discussed about it, which is giraffe. Okay, long neck evolved due to generations of stretching to reach the leaves of tall trees. Another example we have also discussed, the forelimbs of aquatic birds like ducks into wings and toes became webbed like structure appeared over here, which help in swimming. Also, snake is also a good example. Snake evolved elongated body and lost limbs due to burrowing habits. Here you can see in this image, the ancestors of the snake have limbs, but due to its burrowing nature, or we can say the crawling nature inside the burrows, cause loss in his limbs. Then moles and cave fishes eyes degenerated due to disuse in dark environments. These all examples supported the Lamarckism theory. Now coming to the criticism of Lamarckism. The first criticism, or the first question, arised by the Weismann. This theory was formulated to explain the mechanism of inheritance, or it directly opposed the Lamarckism, especially the idea that acquired characters are inherited. Okay, this theory was proposed by August Weismann, which was a German evolutionary biologist, and he said that hereditary material is carried only in germ cell, not in somatic cells. According to Lamarck, environment can affect the structure of any organism, okay, which is counted as acquired character, and these characters can be uh, transferred or passed on to the next generation. But Weismann said only germ cells can be carried as hereditary material, not the somatic cells. Change in somatic cells like injuries, habits, or environment cannot affect the germ cell. Therefore, acquired traits are not passed to the next generation. Okay, the changes caused by environment affect only somatic cells, not germ cell, and only germ cells are passed to the next generation, not the somatic cell. Germ plasm contains specific structure called determinants, which are similar to genes. We now call them genes. These determinants control the development of traits in offspring. Okay. To prove this point, he conducted an experiment, which is Weismann mouse tail experiment. In this experiment, he cut the tail of the mouse for 22 generations, but He observed that the offspring still had a long tail. Okay, no offspring was born tailless. So the conclusion of this experiment was the loss of a body part means which is an acquired change does not affect the germ cell. Hence, acquired characters cannot be inherited. Okay, this was an important criticism for Lamarckism. And another demerits are, according to Lamarck, unused organ degenerate. But many organs like appendix in humans, wings in flightless birds persist for millions of years despite being non-functional. It is also a very important point to disapprove the Lamarckism. Similarly, frequent use of the muscles does not lead to permanent hereditary changes. Mendel's experiment shows inheritance is controlled by genes located in the chromosome, not by somatic cells. Traits are passed through the DNA, not by changes in the body organs due to use and disuse. These were the demerits of Lamarck's theory. Then the Neo-Lamarckism, which was a revised version of original Lamarck theory of inheritance of acquired characters. This theory arose late in 19th to 20th century. Okay, this theory arose when scientists tried to re-examine and modify the Lamarck's idea. No, Neo-Lamarckism emphasizes scientific evidence and includes the role of environment, physiology, and heredity. Environment can introduce changes in any organism, and some of these changes may affect germ cells also. In Neo-Lamarckism, scientists says that scientists state in this theory that some environment changes can affect germ cells also, not only somatic cells, but germ cells can also be affected by environment. New habits and activities bring about internal physiological modifications. These modifications may sometimes be inherited. It changes direct sorry if changes directly affect germplasm, they can be transmitted to the next generation. These were the important points told by those scientists in Neo-Lamarckism theory. First, they said environment can affect germ cells also. Then new habits and activities bring physiological modifications which can be inherited. Third, if changes directly affect germplasm, then it can be transmitted to the next generation. Then these scientists took the example of the Pavlov experiment, in which a scientist called Pavlov tried to train a dog. Firstly, he placed a food item in front of the dog and noted his response. There was salivation, okay, the secretion of saliva was there. Then he rang a bell and noted the response. No such secretion was there. But when he rang the bell before giving the food to him, his response was secretion of saliva. But the next time he rang the bell without giving the food, the dog started secreting saliva. So, so this learned response is conditioned reflex. Okay, the character that the dog acquired here is known as conditioned response. But Neo-Lamarckians, the scientists who studied the Neo-Lamarckism theory, wrongly interpreted this example. Okay, the modern genetics showed that learned behavior are stored in the nervous system, not in the germ cells. Okay, the the learned behavior is stored in nervous system, not in germ cells, and only germ cells are transferred to the next generation. This was the criticism faced by the Neo-Lamarckism theory. Many experiments were later discredited or unrepeatable. Mendelian genetics and molecular biology proved that genes and DNA control heredity, not the acquired body changes. It is an important statement which says that genes and DNA control the heredity, means the transfer of genes to the next generation. Okay, genes and only DNA control these factors, not the acquired body changes. Modern experiments showed that most acquired traits are not inherited. These were all the important factors which criticize Neo-Lamarckism. Then this is the most important theory, we can say, which is the Darwin's theory of natural selection. It was proposed by Charles Darwin in his famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection in 1859. It is important statement. What was the name of his book? The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and that book was published in 1859. Darwinism is the classic theory of evolution that explain how new species arise through natural selection of variation. Observing plants and animals during his voyage on his ship HMS Beagle. Okay, what was the name of his ship? HMS Beagle. So during his voyage or during his journey on this ship, he observed various plants and animals. Then he observed a kind of bird species, he called them finches or Darwin finches, in the Galapagos Island. Okay, he observed that these finches have different beak shapes adapted to their food sources. It means depending upon the food source, the shape of their beaks was the shapes were different of those finches. The important postulates of this theory: first, overproduction means high reproductive potential. It states that all organisms produce offspring then that can survive. All the organisms produce more offspring that can survive. For example, a pair of rabbit or we can say mouse can produce hundred of young in few years. Okay, here you can see a rabbit or a mouse can produce hundreds of young ones in a few years for their better survival. This is overproduction, means the high reproductive potential. Okay, if they are produced in a large amount, the survival rate will increase. Then the second postulate is struggle for existence. Now, if there are more offspring produced, but the resources are limited. Now, all these offspring will have to fight or will have to struggle for their existence. Okay, because resources are limited. Resources like food, space, anything. Okay, like in case of humans, the space and other resources like food and all things are limited, but the population is very large or very huge population is there. So for survival, we humans have to fight or we have to struggle so that we can fulfill our needs. So because resources are limited, individual compete for survival. Struggle may be intraspecific uh, among the members of the same species, like competition between two dogs for a piece of meat. Okay, if dogs if dogs fight for a piece of meat, this type of interaction is called intraspecific interaction, or intraspecific struggle or competition. Then interspecific competition between different species. Let's say dog and a cat dog and a cat struggling for a piece of meat. This is the case of interspecific interaction and interspecific competition. Then environmental struggle against climate, predators and disease. Okay, then variation. Darwin said that no individuals are identical or same. There are variation among individuals of the same species also. Variations exist naturally in population. For example, some giraffes are taller and some are shorter. This is the term variation. The individual of a population have many characteristics that differ, that make them different from each other. Then survival of the fittest. The individual with favorable variation survive better. Okay, it means nature chooses the best. The individual which will carry the maximum amount of variation in a positive way, okay, which have favorable variation will survive better, reproduce more and pass those traits to the offspring. The individual which is less fit will die. This is the statement by Darwin, which is survival of the fittest. The individual survive longer with favorable variation. Then natural selection. As I already mentioned, that nature chooses the best. Nature acts like a filter, preserving most useful variations and eliminating harmful ones. Over generation, this lead to adaptation. Okay, if an individual is showing variation, it will lead to adaptation, and these adaptation will lead to the emergence of new species. Okay, so natural selection is of three types. First is directional selection. Here you can see the graph. In directional natural selection, this type of selection occur when the selection favors one extreme phenotype, one extreme phenotype over other. So in directional selection, only the extreme phenotype will be preferred over the other. This will cause shift in the average trait of a population over generation. Clear? In directional selection, only extreme phenotype is preferred over the other. This will cause shift in the average trait of a population over generation. For example, during let me write the example of industrial melanism. We'll discuss this example in detail later. So, in industrial melanism, we can say during industrial revolution, dark colored peppered moth became more common because they were better camouflaged on the soot darkened trees. Okay, then the the stabilizing selection, it favors intermediate, not extreme but intermediate or average phenotype. Directional selection favor the extreme phenotype, but the stabilizing selection will favor the intermediate or average phenotype, and directly reducing the variation. If only extreme phenotypes are favored, then there will be more variation in species. But uh, if intermediate phenotypes are favored, then it will reduce the variation among species. Okay, and it will ultimately eliminate the extreme traits. For example, we can say human birth weight. For example, uh, in human birth weight, where both very low and very high weights are disadvantageous for the babies. Okay, and the babies which have the average weight have highest chances of survival. Okay, now disruptive selection. In disruptive selection, nature favors two or more extreme phenotype. In this type of selection, nature favors two or more extreme phenotypes. For example, a population of rabbits. Uh, Let me write. A population of rabbits living on both black and white terrains. So rabbits that are white or black are favored over grey. Clear? It will split the population trait. Here you can see, let me show you in the graph. This was the population before selection, and after the selection it splits into two, black and white. Let us suppose it will eliminate the intermediate phenotypes. Same in the case of this type of selection, in which this was the original population before selection, and it will become like this after the selection of intermediate phenotypes. So this was the natural selection. And the last postulate of Darwin's theory of natural selection was origin of new species. He said changes accumulate over time. Okay, when the favorable variations accumulate over a time period, leads to gradual formation of a new species from the ancestral one. This process is called as speciation, which is the process of formation of new species from pre-existing species. Like here you can see ancestral finch. It will have the this type of beak which eats insects. Okay, then woodpecker type insect eating finches will have this type of beak, and seed eating finches will have this type of beak shape. Three different species were formed from a common ancestor due to the accumulation of variation. What were the variations? In this case, the food habits. Okay, the food habits of these finches leads to the formation of new species. For example, Darwin finches. Let us discuss in detail. During his journey on his ship, he studied finches on Galapagos Island. These birds looked similar overall, but they had different beak size and shape depending on the type of food they eat. Okay, like seed eating, cactus, insect eating, flower, or insect eating, whatever these food habits are. This observation became one of the key inspiration for his theory of natural selection. On each island, food availability created different selection pressure, and birds with favorable beak shape survived and reproduced. Okay, over many generations, this led to the formation of different species adapted to specific niches. As represented here, that all these three species were formed from a common ancestor. Different beak types evolved for eating seeds, insects, and cactus. Another important example is industrial melanism. It is important. So, Industrial melanism is an evolutionary phenomena where darker colored individual of a species become more common than lighter colored ones due to industrial pollution. So let us discuss the whole process. So what was the process? Before the industrial revolution, the trees were covered with pale lichens. Here you can see in this image, the trees are covered with pale lichens. Okay, so light colored moths blended with the background and have the higher chances of survival. Dark colored moths were easily spotted by the birds and eaten more as compared to the white colored or light colored moths. Okay, during the industrial revolution, soot from factories deposited on the stem of the trees, which killed the lichens, and the tree stem became dark in color. The dark color moths camouflaged better. Now in this case you can see the stem is dark in color. Okay, so now the black colored moths have the better chances of survival than the white one, because they can camouflage better, and these species or these colored moths will be eaten by the birds. Then after the Clean Air Act, after Clean Air Act of which was around 20th century, pollution reduced and the lichens returned on these trees, and again the light colored population became more. Okay, their population increased. Observed in peppered moth, Biston Beetleria in England during the Industrial Revolution shows how environmental changes can alter the frequency of trait in population. Firstly, the light color moths were abundant. Then, after the industrialization, black colored moths were abundant. So, it demonstrates reversible evolution. Reversible after, like after the Clean Air Act, again the white colored population become abundant. These are the merits and demerits of Darwinism. First is it provided a natural and scientific mechanism for evolution, highlighted the importance of variation and environment form foundation of modern evolutionary biology. Okay, now the demerits: he didn't explain the origin and inheritance of variation, and he ignored the role of mutation and genetic drift and isolation. Also, he could not explain the sudden evolution or the formation of vestigial organ and the neutral traits. And also, he considered natural selection as the only mechanism which is incomplete. Then, Neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism is the modern form of Darwin's theory of natural selection, and it is the most widely accepted theory of evolution today. So we can write most widely accepted theory, which is Darwinism. Also, it is known as modern synthetic theory of evolution. Scientists like Fisher, Haldane, Wright, Dobzhansky, Mayer, and Simpson were the main contributors. Then, uh, this theory combines the concept of natural selection with Mendelian genetics, mutation theory, cytology, population genetics, and molecular biology. Now, evolution occurred due to changes in the genetic composition of a population over generation. The genetic composition of a population can be influenced by genetic variation, natural selection, and population level processes. Like first is genetic variation. Genetic variation, we can say, is the raw material. is the raw material for evolution. It is raw material for evolution. And these kind of genetic material can be this kind of genetic variation can be produced by mutations, genetic recombination, gene flow, all these things. Okay, if mutation occurred in a particular organism, it will bring variation in its structure or habits. Then genetic recombination can also affect its can also bring out genetic variation. Gene flow means the migration of the migration of individuals bring new genes. Let us consider, here is a population 1 and here is population 2. Individual from this population will migrate to this patch of population, then it will decrease the genetic variation in this patch and increase the genetic variation in this patch. Then the natural selection act on variation. It means more favorable variations are favored by nature, or we can say have the best chances of survival. Okay, or we can say individuals with advantageous traits have high survival rates. Okay, then there is genetic drift. Genetic drift is random change in allele frequency. Suddenly a population became suddenly a drastic change in any population. For example, there are two effects called the bottleneck effect and the founder effect. In bottleneck effect, in this effect, this kind of effect can be seen when a large population suddenly reduced to a small number due to any disaster. Okay, now the surviving population has much less genetic variation. Here you can see this was the original population. In this bottle, this is the original population, and this is bottleneck event, we can say any disaster occurred like flood, volcanic eruption, whatever. Okay, now this is the surviving population after this event, after this disaster. Now this uh, surviving population will create the new population, but this population will have less genetic variation than the original population. Clear? Now the founder effect occur when few individual from a population migrate and start a new colony in different place. New population carries only a small part of genetic variation. For example, this is the parent population. This patch migrate from this colony to other colony, and after couple of generation it will have fewer genetic variation or uh, no variation as compared to the parent population, just because of genetic drift. Okay, the original population will have higher genetic variation. Now, isolation. If a species, if a species, or we can say individual, is isolated reproductively or geographically, will have less genetic variation. For example, there are two patch of population. Okay, this is population A and this is population B. Population A, when interacted with population B, now the offsprings or the new population formed will have higher genetic variation. But let us consider the case of geographical isolation. If a mountain is there between the population A and population B, it will be very difficult for both these population to interact. So it will simultaneously decrease the genetic variation. Now, speciation. Speciation is the origin of new species. When advantageous variation accumulate over time, will lead to the formation of new species. We have already discussed it. Now, these are the merits and limitations of Neo-Darwinism. So, the merits are: it explains the inheritance mechanism using Mendelian genetics. Also, it integrates multiple processes like selection, genetic drift, and isolation. And it is supported by evidence from genetics, paleontology, biochemistry, and molecular biology also. And this theory also explains the origin of variation through the mutation or recombination. The limitations were: it is still debated whether evolution is always gradual. Sometimes evidence support sudden changes or punctuated equilibrium. Cannot fully explain the origin of life itself. The role of epigenetics is a modern addition not included in classical synthesis. Now, this is also important theory given by Hugo de Vries, which was a Dutch botanist. Based on his experiment on evening primrose plant, or its scientific name is Oenothera lamarckiana, this theory explained evolution as the result of sudden and large variation called mutation rather than gradual small changes. So, Hugo de Vries said evolution is not gradual change, but it is a sudden change with large variation in any population or any individual. New species arise not by slow accumulation of small variation, but by sudden changes, which is basically mutation. Due to mutation, sudden changes occurred in the genetic material, or we can say any organism structure, which will lead to the formation of new species. Now, mutation occur in the germ cell. Mutation occur in the germ cells, and these germ cells can be passed on to the next generation. A single mutation may sometimes lead to the formation of new species also. Okay, so This was the evening primrose experiment performed by Hugo Vries. Firstly, he took the seeds from the self-pollinating normal plant and observed that the normal plants, these seeds will form into normal plants and some different plants which were fewer in number. The majority of the number were normal plants, but a fewer plants were different. So again, he took the seeds of normal plant and again observed that normal plants were there in majority and some different plants were also there. So he concluded that this change in the plant generation is due to sudden changes called mutation. Due to mutation, a fewer amount of a fewer or we can say different varieties are obtained when this plant was self-pollinated and its seeds were allowed to grow. Majority of F1 plants were similar to the parents, but few were different plants. The different plants were also self-pollinated, and when their seeds were sown, the majority of the plants were similar to the parents, while few were still more different plants, and this continues generation after generation. These were the merits of mutation theory. This theory explained the origin of sudden variation, which Darwinism could not define. He also highlighted the importance of mutation in evolution and heredity. Mutation are known to be major sources of genetic variability. What were the criticism? Mutation alone cannot explain evolution. Most mutations are harmful or neutral, but very few are advantageous. Evolution is not always sudden. Fossil records often show gradual changes. De Vries Oinothera mutants were later shown to be due to chromosomal rearrangement, not true gene mutations. He ignored the role of natural selection, recombination, and genetic drift. So that's all for today's lecture. If you have any query or if you want uh, this presentation or any kind of study material, you can mail us at official.lunchaffair.11@gmail.com. Thank you so much.